So our next speaker is Mo Aziz. He's a partner with Abraham Watkins, and he has a wide range of personal injury cases. He's representing over 150 claimants affected by the Arkema chemical plant explosion in Crosby, and over 1,000 homeowners in flood litigation in Fort Bend County.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to start with thanking the Harris County Attorney's Office for having me here today. It's a privilege to talk in front of this crowd. What I've done today is, and typically what I do in these type of talks is, I talk about case studies, cases that we've had, cases that we have right now also, that have some type of environmental aspect to them. We do have a wide practice, but environmental torts are something that I've been practicing for the past almost 10 years now. And what we, at least what I specialize mostly in, is personal injuries from environmental disasters or catastrophic events that have a aspect on the environment as well as on people. The first case that a case study that I'll talk about here is an explosion that happened at a fertilizer facility back in 2013. I think everybody remembers that event, at least in Texas we all do. Initially, nobody knew what the cause was. There was a lot of speculation whether this was some type of criminal event or what exactly happened that pretty much destroyed the town of West, took the lives of numerous first responders and Good Samaritans who were trying to put out the fire. When we got a fire and then subsequently an explosion, one of the main aspects of this case was the lack of knowledge that was provided to first responders as to the dangers of the product that was being stored at Adair Grain / West Fertilizer. There was a lot of different stories about this, but after hundreds of depositions taken, over 1 million documents produced in discovery by the manufacturers of the fertilizer products, there's a few things that we learned which were really particular to this case. But just by way of background, West is a small town north of Waco, and it's a farming community. Unlike our very thriving, diverse business community in Houston, West is in McLennan County and is mostly of agricultural farming community. And in the middle of their community, they had a farm store called West Fertilizer. And one of the things that West Fertilizer sold was ammonium nitrate, which is fertilizer, and is also an explosive, by the way. A lot of people don't know that, but it is a highly volatile explosive substance. We do know that after the initial, once literally the dust settled, ATF did their initial investigation, and once we got into litigation, it was apparent to us early on that West Fertilizer itself and the city of West and the volunteer firefighters who worked there had no idea of what this product was that was being stored. They knew it was fertilizer. They knew some of them knew that fertilizer had been used in the Oklahoma City bombing, but nobody had any idea as to what the dangers were. And this was demonstrated by the fact that they had what the manufacturers called as important receptors, which really were things like schools, a nursing home, an apartment complex, was in right around this fertilizer storage facility, which was, as we found out, unfortunately, a really bad location for the facility. One thing that I've seen in these cases is that location of these facilities can make a huge difference. What they're surrounded by, where they're located themselves, and I'll talk about another case in a bit where the location of the facility itself is a problem. Here the problem was that the facility was surrounded by literally a nursing home right next door, an apartment complex, the school. Thankfully, this explosion, a fire and explosion happened in the evening, and all the kids from the high school and middle school had gone home. Had this been earlier, this disaster would have been 10 times or more worse. What we've put together here for you is a few minute long presentation as to how we believe this fire happened and what happened inside that wood building. One thing to note was, and this still happens in a lot of small towns, there's been some OSHA regulations. As a result of our litigation, OSHA issued some directives as to storing ammonium nitrate in wood structures where there is no sprinkler system. West Fertilizer was a wood facility and had no sprinkler system. The cause of the fire to date is not known. ATF came out with some backward science where they said, well, we've ruled out electrical and we've ruled out some type of other fire, so this has to be arson, but that nothing has ever come of that. What we do know is that the ammonium nitrate was being stored in these bins, and there are literally thousands of these facilities in the state of Texas, all across the agricultural belt, especially in the area around Waco, A&M, and all those areas have a lot of these facilities. We know that the ammonium nitrate was stored in these wood bins. It kind of piled up in that fashion. They did have a bucket elevator that had a pit, and this came into play during the course of our litigation. As you see, and this is an animation that we did for our litigation purposes, that when the fire started, ammonium nitrate has a certain melting point. It started to melt. As it got molten, it started to flow. And the flow of the product took it towards the elevator pit. And what's significance of the pit is that the manufacturers of the ammonium nitrate that sold this product knew all along the dangers of wood construction and the dangers of pit type of areas within structures that can cause a problem if there's a fire. What our experts came up was that with the molten AN, it started to get into the pit area and decompose. And what happens with ammonium nitrate is that as it decomposes, it becomes more and more volatile. Just for those who don't know, ammonium nitrate is the same product that was used in Oklahoma City, First World Trade Center, numerous industrial accidents all over the world. In the Texas City explosion that wiped out their entire fire department with the exception of one firefighter, and is also the subject of the Takata airbag recall, and is also used, unfortunately, by terrorists overseas to make IEDs. So this is the same product, 50 tons of which was literally in the middle of the city of West, unbeknownst to the firefighters, and what we'll hear later on is even unbeknownst to the people who ran the facility. We found in our discovery this phone call.
Just to see if you had an idea of this explosive material of ammonium nitrate. I realize it's not explosive, but are powerful, but we've got a totally huge fire in West Fertilizer.
7:50 is when that explosion happened, and this was the phone call made by the owner. So what we see there, just to give you guys a little background of that phone call, was at some point, one of the gentlemen who was the manager of the store, that was his voicemail. So he got to the scene. Thankfully, he survived this explosion because a first responder had stopped him at a perimeter. But he gets to the scene, he pulls out his phone, he calls the sales agent for the manufacturer. And he left that voicemail for him, which says, I know this is not explosive. I know this won't explode in the fire, but we've got a pretty big fire. And then there's the explosion. And so from a knowledge perspective, we were able to prove that these people had no idea what they were dealing with. And the firefighters unfortunately had no idea. We do know from a planning perspective, when the city of West was being planned, West Fertilizer was there before. And over time, they built an apartment building which was 450 feet west of it. There was a nursing home, intermediate school, high school, middle school, hospital, and numerous single-family homes, all of which were destroyed. Here we have kind of a before and after taken of what the city looked like before and what it looked like post-explosion a day or two after. Extensive damage to the community of West. Unfortunately, and we had discussions with the county attorneys in McLean County and the district attorney, where we tried to show them the evidence that we had found in our case, to show, hey, listen, this was not some event where these guys knew what they were doing. This was more of an event where they were not informed of the damage that this product could cause. No action was taken by the authorities there on trying to hold anybody accountable in a criminal prosecution. However, we were eventually able to get the case resolved and try to at least get some resolution to our clients, which we represented 95 of them. The city of West did bring a case on this litigation, and they were able to they hired some plaintiffs' firms. They were able to they had severe infrastructure damage to the water system, damage to the sewage system, and we were able to, our group that was on the executive steering committee in that case was able to get a significant settlement from the manufacturers of the ammonium nitrate that was on site. One thing that this case brought to light, for me at least, was the lack of information that was shared with the first responders. What we did find is that these manufacturers in other countries and in Europe and South America, they actually invite first responders onto their facilities and have training sessions for them as to, hey, how to combat a situation where there is a fire or other a release of chemical, or how to deal with it. These first responders were trained in ammonia damage or the dangers of ammonia. And there was also ammonia being stored on site. What evidence from the ones that survived during their deposition, it shows that they were focused on the ammonia the storage tank. They wanted to keep the fire away from there. One of the volunteer firefighters and also a worker at West Fertilizer, his last statement to the firefighters was, hey, this thing is never going to get hot enough to blow. Those were the last words he said. After that, he died in the explosion. These are all first responders, and one of our goals at least was to make sure that there is some awareness created by the manufacturers and as to how dangerous their products are. Another thing that we found, which was very interesting, is that the manufacturers had spent significant dollars in lobbying against some federal programs that may have prevented this. So under the APCRA and the RMP, what the proposed regulation was that all of these facilities should file a worst case scenario type of plan with the local LEPC. And a worst case scenario for West Fertilizer would have been 50 tons of ammonium nitrate blows up, destroys all these structures, and could be a huge problem. That never happened. And that legislation never got passed because of the lobbying efforts from the manufacturers. We do know this is a hazardous compound. It had environmental effects. AN can have pretty severe effects on the environment. for livestock, for agriculture. And this just kind of shows the scale of damage caused by this disaster. Because the human aspect of this case was so severe, and there were so many fatalities and injuries, serious injuries, that the environmental aspect of West Fertilizer was lost a bit because everybody was focused on the human tragedy of it. What we do know is that at some point, previously TCEQ had investigated West, but after the explosion, numerous families were displaced, the school district was closed, hundreds of residents of West complained of conditions such as burning eyes, scratchy throats, for a long time. For a long time they had these complaints, and there was, at least in some instances, they even had to be hospitalized because of the inhalation from the smoke and the ammonia that was released once the ammonium nitrate cloud landed. We also know there was damage to the sewage system of the city, and a lot of pollutants were introduced into the environment. And there never was a true cleanup or remediation of that town. It just hasn't happened. And for a number of reasons, I would think, but there was never a focus on the environmental impact of this tragedy. The next one, and I'll talk briefly about this case because it is an ongoing case, but what we do know are about things that are already in the public sphere. The Arkema plant was, after Hurricane Harvey, we know that there were a couple of fire and explosions at the Arkema facility in Crosby. And Arkema is a facility that makes peroxides. They have to be kept at a certain temperature. If you cannot maintain that temperature, then those peroxides will break down, decompose, and there'll be an explosion or fire, including release of chemicals into the atmosphere. Currently, this case has been ongoing. It's a very complicated case. There's been several defenses raised by Arkema, some of them being such as, hey, this was just an act of God. Hurricane Harvey was a very severe event, and there's nothing that we could do. Well, here's what they could have done. Many years before this tragedy, FM Global, which is a risk management group that goes from refinery to chemical plant to do risk assessments for them before they write insurance, told Arkema, hey, your flood mitigation plan is out of date. Okay, due to the construction and the expansion in our city and the surrounding areas, the floodplain has changed. I think after Harvey, everybody knows that. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a rain event where there was again flooding, but the floodplains in Harris County and surrounding areas have changed. Sophisticated people, such as chemical plants, know of this change. And what they're supposed to do in that situation is either move your plant or have a flood mitigation plan which is airtight, and also have an evacuation plan in anticipation of disasters, in anticipation of natural disasters. We're not in the day and age where a hurricane just comes upon us. At least for Harvey, I know there was 5, 6, 7 days worth of notice that there's a big storm forming in the Gulf. We also know from what's in the public record that other competitors of Arkema moved their peroxides off-site, and they sent them off at least in one case, to San Antonio, loaded up the trailers and sent them off, so there would not be any issue. This case has recently, we've added other defendants, Cooper Industries. I won't bore you all with the details of the new defendants and what their roles are. The case was, there's multiple parallel cases going on the civil side, and recently we were able to get the case remanded to state court in Judge Darrell Moore's court. And currently, we represent the number of individual clients. Now, this is not a class action. The number of individual clients that we represent is over 250, which includes first responders, residents, all of whom had different degrees of damage, all the way from severe permanent lung damage to, hey, I had to go to the ER because I had flu-like symptoms. Also concurrently, there's a class action pending in federal court, which we are not involved in, but we monitor, where the class was actually certified, which is a very significant event. This is in Judge Ellison's court. After a 2-day hearing, the class was eventually certified. It's up on appeal, and that's where we stand. There's also another Arkema-related case, Liberty County versus Arkema. We represent the county in that case, Liberty County, where allegations under the Texas Clean Air Act, the Texas Water Code, and common nuisance type of common law elements have been alleged. We've been ordered to go to mediation in that case by the judge in Liberty County. Another case that we're involved in right now, everybody remembers this. This is a recent event, and it seems to me at least that there's an uptick in these type of events where you have fires, explosions, off-site consequences, where you have, in some cases, injuries, in some cases, on-site, in some cases, very widespread, such as the ITC case, which is another case that is going to be, I believe, going on for a long time. My partner, Benny Agosto, and I are working on that case. We know the basic facts. There was a fire that broke out. They tried to put it out. It came back on. So this whole saga went on at least for a week, from what I remember, and caused a lot of disruption in people's lives. I mean, in addition to the injuries that have been caused and the business losses, it was just a very disruptive event for the entire city. I remember people from our staff could not leave their homes and get to work because certain highways were closed. And at the end of the day, we believe that the ITC obviously is going to also be responsible for this event, not only on the personal injury aspect of it, but also the environmental aspect of it. We know there was a release of benzene. There were pretty high benzene levels. There's some cases we're going to bring under the OPA. There'll be, their position is going to be there was no oil released into the ship channel. We have some evidence that there was. So there's multiple fronts to this litigation, which I believe is going to go on for a significant period of time. The main case has been consolidated in federal court in Houston. The maritime case would also be in federal court, and currently we're in the discovery process. This is another case that we had here. Last year there was a fire and explosion at the Carrare America facility. This is in Pasadena. Again, there was ethylene release from one of the reactors. Reactor 1201 was being pressurized during the startup, and I can talk about this case at length because we've taken a lot of depositions in here recently. This is a current case, but at the end of the day, the operators within that were in the control room that morning were unable or ignored the rising pressures, and there was from 8 a.m. till 10:28 till the time of the fire and explosion, they had a high alarm and then a high alarm. They have two settings for their alarms: a high alarm and a high alarm. And they're both what we call repeater alarms, is that they repeat themselves every 10 minutes. And these operators ignored those alarms starting 8 a.m. till the time of the explosion, which was 10:28. Again, there was a release of ethylene into the atmosphere, which of course has environmental aspects as well. The fire burned for at least 3 minutes. Unfortunately for our clients who were contractors on site, they were not evacuated from during the startup, and what resulted in is over 100 burn and orthopedic type of injuries where people fell off scaffoldings when the fire happened, because literally everybody there thought that the entire reactor was going to blow, based on just previous images from Texas City BP plant, Phillips explosions in the past. So there was widespread injuries. This case is ongoing. It's been in what's called an MDL litigation, multi-district litigation. It's been consolidated with Judge Moore also here in Harris County, and the trials are scheduled to begin in spring of next year. One thing that we did find in this case is that the operators were the ones that Curare was obviously blaming, that hey, these two operators did not understand that the reactor was reaching its what they call maximum allowable working pressure, MAWP, and they made a mistake. It was human error. But what we did find was that the pressure relief valve that Curare had was not in compliance with API, American Petroleum Institute standards. The standard requires that the pressure relief valve should be 50 feet above any structure and should be vertical. This pressure relief valve was horizontal and right above where the workers were working. So when it released, it basically, there was overflow of ethylene in that area, which found an ignition source. We also found that almost 9 years ago, Curare was given recommendations by a consultant to vent all the PSVs, the pressure relief valves, to the flares. So if there is overpressure, it's just going to burn off and there won't be an explosion. But just a few of the things that show that what I've learned is that in these type of disasters, it's not just one error at one time made by one operator. In this case, at least we know it was at least a decade of errors where they were told, hey, you can have safety systems, you can release it to the flare, you can have a better alarm system, you can have an interlock mechanism that would shut down the reactor after a certain pressure. None of that happened. And so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully we can get the case resolved or tried early 2020. And with that, guys, that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Juan Parras, with Texas. But my question is on the RMPs. Initially, when they first came out, I remember actually going to the Pasadena Fairgrounds, and all the companies were there, all the refinery plants, chemical plants, and they actually handed out literature about their RMPs. But now, citizens like us have to go through a whole lot of process to get that information. I guess it's being declassified or considered not, maybe that it's none of our business. So how can we get that information again?
Yes, sir. That's a great question. So in the RMP on the West, in the situation of West Fertilizer, what happened was at some point it was deemed classified because ammonium nitrate can be used for illicit purposes. So they said, hey, this is classified, nobody needs to know about it. Well, if nobody knows about it, there's nothing, then how can the first responders train themselves? To answer your question in specific, under the current state of the law, I think there's been some rollback by the federal administration on enforcement of RMP, the RMP rule. And really, right now, I think the situation is such that more needs to be done, if not at the federal, at the state level, to make sure that these, or even the county level, to make sure that these, the worst case scenario type of documents are being shared with not only the first responders, but people who live around in the community, because I feel they have a right to know what can happen if something goes wrong in a facility that they live next door to. But currently, at least under the federal program, there is no provision for a civilian to get a document which is considered classified. I hope that answers your question. It's not the most helpful answer, but I hope it answers it.
No, it did answer the question, and as a follow-up, most recently now, there's chemical security policy, and even that information is difficult to get. So that we can at least alert ourselves and find out what's in that facility that is a risk to the public.
Yes, sir, and that's what the EPCRA, which is the federal law, which under the current administration has been rolled back, that's what it allowed at least the LEPCs to know what's in the facilities and what harm can be done to the neighborhoods around them. Currently, that information, if it's classified, is my understanding, is not available to people who are not in law enforcement. Thank you.